Hello, my name is Joshua Darling. I am a college student at the University of New Mexico. I am a first year. I'm going to give a review about Paul Fussel's book, Poetic Meter and Poetic Forms. I will be only reviewing the first chapter, which is the nature of meter. In this review, I will be giving a introduction, summary. I will give pros and cons and a conclusion about this chapter. Mainly, this chapter is just going to be about poetic rhythm and mainly how it works. So let me get into it. So Paul Fussell is a scholar. He's known for making these books. These are more complex books, so a little bit trickier to understand. But in the poetic meter and form, he mainly just lays out how meter shapes poetry, mainly. Simpler way to say it. He explains it not just as a technical tool, but something that he explains it as it influences our emotional response. You know, how us, the reader, is going to react during this chapter and what we read. So in the chapter, he mainly explains how meter is a physical and emotional force that helps us create meaning in poetry. Meaning like that we're reading a physical word, but we're getting an emotional response back to it. It's what creates poetry and how poetry flows in the rhythm of it. This chapter is also just for like beginners, like beginning poetry. It's Paul Fussell helps with the metrical patterns, which I'll speak into that in a little bit, but yeah. Okay, so Paul Fussell begins by stating that meter is not optional. It's a component of poetic meaning. He calls it a meter, which is a emotional reaction or a physical concept, something like that. He explains that meter works on us at a body level, through rhythm, thinking, intellectual level, through just patterns that he points out through the book. He breaks us down through rhythm structures and stressed and unstressed syllables, which there are four metrical syllables. These syllables they're kind of like the reaction. They're what he explains throughout the whole chapter, basically. So I'm going to be reading from my script that I made. But in my script, I put that in the beginning of the chapter, he stated that the empirical study of poetry will convince us that meter is a prime physical and emotional constitute of poetic meaning. That was found on page 3 of the chapter. But Ezra Pound, who insisted this, meant scientific methods to analyze poetry and how it is created, how humans can understand it. Meter is a physical emotion that the reader gets when reading such poetry. It also helps create the pleasure of reading it. It gives tension for the reader with such words. And later on in page 4, Paul speaks of a man who said, "What is poetry?" And Paul stated that Johnson answered, "Why, sir, it is much easier to say what is not." That is found on page 4 of the chapter. It's easier to say, or it's easier to understand what it is versus what to say what it is. It's just something that a reader needs to read about. And then let me skip later. So I spoke on stressed and unstressed syllables, and there are 4 in this chapter. The first one is the syllabic. The second one is the accentual, or it's called a stress meter. The third one is the accentual syllabic, or called a syllabic stress. And the fourth one and last is the quantitative. These 4 are the metrical systems that Paul Fussell refers to. These 4 metric systems have their own personalities, differences. Either has multiple syllable counts or the other one doesn't include syllable counts. For such, there's a pattern for the syllabi count, and the pattern starts off with a 776. That is the pattern for the syllabi. And then the meaning of the 776 is that there are 4 lines. 3 of them have 7 syllables, and the last one has 6. This structure allows for a more fluent, proper syllabic meter. That is the structure. So some positive things that I found through reading this chapter from Paul Fussell was that he really analyzed the metrical systems, and breaks it down, and is very easy for the reader to understand. It's very helpful. He uses strong examples which help us. When he used the example of the 667, it made more understanding of what does this mean, uses seven syllables and then 6 syllables, and then it follows a more fluent pattern for poetry. And on the negative points, I thought that there was very limited diversities, which what I mean by that is that he didn't include much examples of what this could mean. He focused on very traditional English, which is easy for me to understand, but say we have someone older than us that are maybe not from here that could use different examples, which more different examples are used in, I think, the quantitative. The quantitative gives more like Rome-ish poetry. That's mainly where it comes from, but that's what I think. And then I also thought that that some sections had more larger words, more words you need to put into a dictionary to understand. That was a little bit of a setback, but not really. Just larger, more academic language they used. This book was also made some decades ago, so it's not mainly like to our our position. This was more accounted for the decades ago, and it's more quite not really understanding for this evolution of our poetry. It's not, 1 and 1 doesn't match. So I'm gonna give my opinion on the chapter. I thought reading this book was great. I thought this chapter was very helpful for me to understand. I don't read as much poetry, so reading this chapter helped me understand poetry and the rhythm in it. It also made me understand how it works, how they put in such poetry so it flows correctly and everything's just not all over the place. And I thought I'm gonna give this chapter. I'll give this chapter a solid 8 out of 10. I thought it was good. Very, very helpful when trying to expand our knowledge, in my opinion. But I also think that if you're not up to having such academic language, it could be more difficult to understand and read, for sure. Thank you for listening to my review on Paul Fussell's Poetic Meter and Poetic Form. I had fun doing this. It was fun to read. It was fun to give this review. So on that note, I hope you have a good day. Good day tomorrow. I will see you in class. And I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you.